I was born in 1960. I was abandoned on the roadside near Kabale or in Kabale. In terms of my birth circumstances, although I wouldn't obviously remember my birth, but I would say that the circumstances of my birth were very much part of my childhood. My mum had a dream about me. So although we were Sikhs, we were very much also influenced by Hinduism. And my mum said that goddess Lakshmi had come to her. She was expecting a girl at the time, my sister Anju, but she was also going to have another little girl. They found me in the hospital when I was born. The local newspapers reported that I was an Asian child that had been found abandoned. My family came to realize in time, or my mum and dad came to realize that actually I wasn't an Asian child. I was actually half African and half Asian.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of Expulsion at 50. I first met Bharti Dhir in London back in July 2022. As a child, she carried a very deep secret with her, one of her true identity. The impact of this has been far-reaching. My name is Dola Vasani, and I have the privilege of sharing Bharti's journey with you, one that is filled with strength, empathy, and grace.
So the reason I would say that actually influenced my childhood growing up in Uganda was because I grew up with these sort of whispered innuendos and rumors of people telling me that I didn't belong to the family. Primary school years were marred with lots and lots of fights. The other part of my childhood was there was this concept. I just remember as a child constantly being told by people that I was a lucky child. I brought my family luck. I just remember that sort of sense of responsibility with people asking me things like women asking me to predict whether they were going to have a boy or a girl if they were pregnant, asking me to bless papers because they were about to buy a house. I remember just that feeling of responsibility and wondering why people were asking me to do these things. But nobody really explained that I was adopted.
This notion of being the lucky child, what sort of age do you remember being when they were calling you that?
My awareness of that started around the age of 5, 6 years old. People inviting my mum to their houses, buying me with sweets and biscuits, and actually then asking my mum, "Oh, ask Bharti, is this baby going to be a boy or a girl?" In some cases, even asking me to touch their tummy. I had no idea why they were asking me. The sense of responsibility and pressure came much later in my teens when I thought, hang on a minute, I don't have these superpowers. Why are they asking me these things?
It seems like you're having opposite experiences. So on the one hand, you're having fights in the school.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you're having these requests to be kind of the saint.
That was a very conflictual childhood in that sense, because there was one part of the community who disapproved intensely that my parents had adopted me, saying to my parents, "Why are you adopting her? She's a girl. You don't adopt girls. On top of it, she's African, so you're bringing dishonor on the family. People are going to assume either my My dad had had an affair, or my mum had an affair with an African person. So they were like, this is going to impact on marriages. It's a very eerie feeling or surreal feeling, knowing that there's something about you that either people dislike or love. And as a child, you can't make sense of it. I couldn't understand why some people would come up to me and say, in the temple or in the street or in school, and say, you're not really part of that family, because I didn't actually see the color difference. I didn't see that I was darker. I didn't see my curly hair. My parents instilled in me that I was theirs, and that was it.
Something very lovely about the fact that your parents just and your siblings just accepted you for who you were. Were you able to go home and share that with them, or share that with your siblings?
When we did go back to my mum and dad and say, oh, some people really being mean, they said, I'm not part of this family. My dad was very stern, very strict personality. And he would say, all right, I'm going to go and talk to the parents. And he would just storm off to talk to the parents. Whereas my mum would say, oh, don't be silly. I don't know why they're saying that. They're just jealous of you because you're so pretty. When I was 8, it came as quite a shock when I went into a study and actually saw a file with my name on it. And I saw the word adopted, and then looked up the word adopted in the dictionary and realized actually I wasn't, I was part of the family, but in another sense, that realization that my parents had lied. Again, it was a very conflicting feeling, knowing that I shouldn't have been in that study because it was forbidden to us children. So I knew I would get into trouble if I told my father I'd seen a file with my name on it and I was adopted. And knowing that I had to keep that a secret from my parents, that I knew that I was adopted. But then at the same time, desperate to just sort of get some explanation. How? Why? I saw the paper saying this baby had been found on the roadside, but all the sort of those feelings of confusion and that sort of looking at my parents almost like with a new eyes and saying, when they're talking to me and when they were doing that game of, oh, she looks like me, thinking, but I don't look like you, it's that realization that it's almost like the lenses had fallen off my glasses.
And I wonder, Bharti, why do you think they kept it away from you?
Well, years later, my mum explained that they never wanted me to feel different. In her eyes, I was their child, and that was it. And she never wanted me to feel that I wasn't part of the family. She and my father decided that, maybe there would come a time one day when they'd tell me, but for that period, they just didn't want to rock my world. That is typical of the 60s, children that were adopted in the 60s. It was typical. People didn't talk about adoption. People didn't say, you're adopted. My mum and my dad took that view that it was far more damaging to tell me. And they didn't want to tell me, and they didn't want me to feel that I wasn't part of the family.
And I wonder, once you found that, it was like your open secret.
It was a secret that I told my sister, told Anju, I said, Anju, everybody's right. I'm adopted, look. And she said, the first thing she said was, why did you go in that study? You're going to be in trouble. And then she was like, well, you're still my sister. Don't worry about it. We were very close. So she hugged me. She said, don't worry about it. Just don't tell Dad that you went in that study.
So when did the cat come out of the bag? When did you spill it? When did the beans get spilled?
1976, I got diagnosed with an illness called lupus. Prior to that, I'd already had a skin condition called epidermolysis bullosa, and it's called EB for short. So that was in Uganda, and I had blisters all over my skin. It looked like somebody had thrown boiling water on me. So I'd suffered from that since I was 8. When I came to see the dermatologist, the consultant for the skin problem, I also was very poorly with another illness. And then he said to my mum, oh, she's got an illness called lupus and she has to go to hospital. And then he said to my mum, has anybody else in the family got this condition? And my mum said, oh, I'll tell you in a minute, send Bharti out of the room. So me being me, I was 15 then, I turned around and I said, I'll tell you, they don't know because I was adopted, I was found on the roadside, so there's nothing known about me. And nobody in my family, my adoptive family, knows anything about, has this condition. And I remember the look of utter shock and embarrassment on my mum's face, that realization that I've known. And then I turned around and I said to her in front of the consultant, I said, I know, Mum, I know the story. I've known for many years. I just haven't told you. So that's when the cat got out the bag.
It's a huge discovery and realization that you had at the age of 8. And I wonder whether you feel that there was some connection between that and then the emergence of having EB or being diagnosed with EB, because it's the trauma and the shock that maybe you experienced.
No, the trauma and shock, I think, came from something else, Dolla, and I'll explain that. We were brought up very strictly as girls, very strictly. As girls, we were brought up with all sorts of rules. You don't sit with your legs parted, you don't laugh too much, you don't give an adult man eye contact, you don't, you got to wear clothes to cover your bum area. We were brought up in very typical fashion, I would say. In Uganda, we weren't allowed to go out on the street and play. We could play in the garden, but we weren't allowed to go on the street. Prior to me getting EB, it was about 2 or 3 weeks before, I had an incident, a very, very traumatic incident, where, bearing in mind, my dad still didn't know that I knew about my adoption. And we were playing hide and seek as children. And the gardener, we had a young gardener, he was laughing and I was laughing, and he was telling me where to hide so that the seeker wouldn't find me. So I went and hid. And my father had seen this interchange and was absolutely furious. And I was quite happy playing. And the next minute he summoned me over. And I could see by his face that I was in serious trouble, but I didn't know why. And I've written about it in my book, and I just knew that I was in serious trouble. So, and he had what you call like a club in his hand, and he just started laying that into me. And all I could hear him say to my mom was, stop trying to protect her, because I was using her as a shield, and she was going this way and that way trying to shield me from the blows. And all the servants, the whole family gathered round. The friends that were playing with us, they'd all gathered round to see this spectacle of me being beaten. And I had no idea what I'd done. And all he kept saying was, she is going to bring dishonor on this family. You mark my words, she's going to bring dishonor on this family. And I'm going to kill her today before she does that. In my book, I've sort of talked about that, and I've said, I do wonder whether that was the trigger. Because when I did get EB, he certainly blamed himself totally for the EB. He used to say things like, this is my sin. I committed a sin by hitting this girl. This is God's punishment for me, because I love my daughter, but I'm now seeing her suffer. Why didn't God put that suffering on me? Because I'm the one who committed that sin. What I did was wrong that day. So he then pulled out all the stops to try and get me treatment. But I do wonder whether that was the trigger. Maybe it's a combination of things, finding out I was adopted and then that very severe beating. 2 weeks later, the blisters started popping up on my face and my body. So I don't know.
We don't know, because I think the body has its own way of dealing with issues of trauma. And I wonder also, the pressure as a child to keep something like that so fundamental under wraps.
Knowing what I knew, that I was adopted by then, knowing what my dad meant when he said she's going to bring dishonor on the family, that was maybe that might have been the added trauma of thinking, is my position in this family as secure as I thought I was? Because remember, women in Uganda at that time, yeah, my mom was a strong woman. She was a very strong woman mentally, physically, spiritually. I was carrying this burden of knowing I was adopted, then being told that I was going to bring dishonor on the family, and actually understanding what that meant when he said, she's going to do what her birth mother did. And the reality is that he still didn't know that I understood. He thought I didn't understand what he was saying. So, but I understood. And then, the beating, maybe all of those things culminated in my body, and the stress just came out in blisters.
Yeah. I think so. I think that your cortisol levels and your adrenaline levels probably just went through the roof. Years down the line, were you able to discuss some of these things with him?
Unfortunately, my father died soon after, 1971. And then a year later, Idi Amin ordered Asians to leave. So I never got to talk to my father, and that's a huge regret on my part, because I was able to talk to my mum, when we sat down and she told me the whole story of my adoption and what she dreamt, and I was able to talk to her then, and I talked about the fact that I'd understood all those messages about dishonor and the pressure that had put me under. I couldn't talk to boys, couldn't talk to men, because we couldn't anyway as girls, but I felt like there was just that added level of pressure that I had to be a good girl. I had to make sure that I didn't disgrace my family in any way. I think a very odd relationship around boys, because I would keep them at arm's length, and I would make sure that they knew they were being kept at arm's length, because I was so frightened of this whole concept of dishonor.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? On the one hand, they were prepared to send you to a school which you could say was exclusive and a little bit progressive, and it's a private school. And on the other hand, they had at home quite conservative views.
For that generation, there was immense pressure also on the parents. For that time, yes, on the one hand, you have these moral values that were instilled by culture, tradition, family. But then on the other hand, he also had these other progressive values where he was determined that his daughters would get a good education and potentially get good careers. And he went against the family for that as well, the extended family community, saying, why are you spending so much money on the girls? They're going to get married. You're wasting your money. Girls shouldn't be educated.
Let's fast forward. So I can imagine, his passing was also, a lot of grief and a lot of trauma there as well, not just for you, but for your siblings and for your mom.
Yeah, my mum was 36 when he passed.
She was 36 and she had
30,
five children.
yeah, 5 children.
Okay, so he passes away. She now has to manage the household as a woman. And then this thing happens in 72. And I wonder, like, how that all was for all of you.
It was a horrible time. For my mum, I think it was a very worrying time. She had 5 children. My father had gone. My cousin brothers, two of my cousin brothers were running the business. Suddenly this order came. First we heard the rumor that it was 90 days. Then a couple of weeks later we heard the rumor, oh no, it's only 45 days. So there was just this panic in Kabale. At that time, Dollar, what had happened in Kabale was because Kabale was on the Rwandan-Congo border, Idi Amin was convinced there would be an invasion. So our town was absolutely flooded with soldiers. And one of the first things they did was they took away everybody's cars. In effect, we were all carless. And so when this order came, of course, there was this panic. How were we going to get to Kampala? We didn't have a car, and my mum didn't drive anyway, but my cousins would have driven. But nobody had access to a car. The soldiers had taken everybody's car. And the only car that was left belonged to a taxi. In my book, I've called him Mr. M because I honestly cannot remember his name. But he had a taxi. And he said, I've got 45 families to get up to Kampala. You have to be ready. I will turn up at any time at your house. It could be day or it could be night. We just finished eating. And he turned up and he said, come on, get in the car. Time to go. We were already packed up. And he said, make sure there's not any cents, because the soldiers said if they found even 1 cent in any of the belongings, they would class that as trying to smuggle money out. So we just got in the car and we left. Checkpoints every 50 miles or so, there was a checkpoint. At the first checkpoint, they pointed the gun at my mum. They just shot in the car in front. It was another family. They weren't from Kabale. They had a disabled boy around 7-8 years of age. And because he was taking time to get him out of the car, they just shot him, threw his wheelchair down the hill, then shot him and threw his body down the hill, which was very traumatic for us as children to see. And then it was our turn and we got out of the car and the soldier pointed a gun at my mum. And he said, you need to leave her behind because she's one of us. She's not one of yours. And he meant me. Obviously, I knew what it meant, but my mum didn't know at that time that I knew I was adopted. So it was that very traumatic time of thinking he's going to shoot my mum because my mum was saying no, very differentially, but very clearly saying no, she's mine. I'm not going to leave her behind. And thinking he's going to shoot me. He said, what use is she where you are going? And at that point, I thought, that's it. I'm going to get shot now. Or my mum's going to get shot. Or we're all going to get shot. It may have just been a couple of minutes, but it felt like you were there for eternity, waiting for a decision as to whether he was going to shoot or not. And he ordered my mum, and the third time he actually cocked the trigger. He was pointing to her chest. And he said, I'm giving you this last order once more. You have to leave her behind because she doesn't belong to you. And my mum said, I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to leave her behind. Because she said no repeatedly, he ended up putting his gun down and saying to my mum, I salute your courage, you can go. And we left. We're on tenterhooks at every checkpoint. Will I go through the same experience again? Will they say my mum has to leave me behind?
A terrifying experience, for everyone, and for your mom and for you and for your siblings to witness that. Yeah, and you just wonder, like, how do you process all of that?
I think for us as children, you get that sense of terror. But actually, to be honest, I think your mind and your heart gets numb. It gets numb to what's happening around you. You are in survival mode. when you're in a situation like that, not just my family, but with other people that I've spoken to who left Uganda and saw some very horrible things happening. It's the processing comes after, when you're in a safe place. And that's when it really hits you. And even now, my cousins who have read my book, they said they were re-traumatized on reading my book because they had deliberately made the decision to block those memories out. And my sister said that she had made a decision to block certain memories out. So I think people deal with trauma in a different way and they process things in a different way. And there are some people that will decide, I'm going to block it out and never talk about it. And I'm not going to ever discuss it with anybody ever again. And then you've got the other people who will say, I want to talk about it. I want to let it all out. I want to vent. I want people to know what happened. I don't want history to repeat itself. And I want people to know we went through this.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, there's the immediate response or reaction to the trigger, which is either fight, flight, or freeze. And then I think the issue about not talking about it, how there are two, many camps, but, if you had to be binary, it would be those who want to block it out, don't bring it back, and those who feel that by talking about it, it can be healing and cathartic. Writing about it is part of that process, or whether you feel that by doing that and knowing that these things are now in a book, it's for public consumption, then by talking about it, you are able to almost get some sort of distance from it, and to be able to be almost not totally dissociated, but you can see it, you can see yourself, but it's not you have it, it doesn't have you.
An essential part of healing from trauma is to not let that situation or incident that caused that trauma to have any power over you, to have that hold over you. It's about letting go of the past, but actually also acknowledging that there was this past. Writing the book was, as you said, cathartic, in the sense that it allowed me to vent everything I'd ever felt. And actually, it helped me process and remember things that I'd also wanted to shut away, but they started coming to the fore. And I actually felt like that situation no longer had power over me. One of the key things that I grew up with was this sense of, who am I? What's my identity? I'm adopted in an Asian family, but I'm actually half African as well. Do I embrace the African culture, or do I embrace the Asian culture? But then neither cultures or communities totally accept me. For me, by writing the book, I was able to sort of let go of some of those negative messages I'd had about being illegitimate, about being adopted, about being half African, being half Asian. It enabled me to let go of the negativity and let go of the past.
So, Bharti, let's just go back to the idea of the book. When did you first consider writing worth?
I'd always wanted to write. The idea came about when I adopted my own child. I don't want to leave this world. And my daughter say at my funeral, do you know what? I had my mum, but I knew nothing about her. Feelings about life, about, values that she held. And I thought, I'm going to start writing. So I started writing. This book took me literally 3 to 4 years at inception. And I would say it took me that long because I was not a disciplined writer. It was only when I won a competition with Hay House, where they were looking for Black and minority ethnic writers. And I submitted a chapter because my niece told me, this is amazing, this book you've written. You shouldn't just leave it for your daughter. This is a book for the world. When I submitted that chapter and Hay House got involved, that's when I had to be more disciplined, because then I had deadlines to meet. And that's how the book came to fruition. But I actually started originally to write it for my daughter. It's helped validate her feelings, because she's going through very similar issues regarding identity that I had at her age, feeling of rejection from birth family, that feeling of, obviously I'm adopted, I'm in an Indian family, she's adopted, she's by virtue of being adopted, she's also in an Indian family. It's helped her realize my mum has a past, my mum's gone through some of these. And I think if you read my book and then you see who I am as a person today, I do not buy into the traditions, the prejudicial traditions and the prejudicial values. So I'm hoping that my daughter will be a much more stronger person and be able to stand tall and proud and say, I want to buy into the values that my mum had. For my book, my wish is as many people that are led to read it will read it, because I think it has a message. Somebody said to me after reading my book, this book covers so much. It has so many facets to it. You know, there's the story of my birth, then there's the story of my adoption, then there's the story of bullying, the epidermolysis bullosa, the lupus, almost dying from lupus, and then you've got the coming out of it and actually coming out what I think was a real bout of depression when I really felt suicidal, having to come out of it and think, no, I am worthy, I am worthy, and I have a right to be here. I have a right to be on this earth, and I have a purpose, and I'm going to fulfill that purpose. The book has so many facets it can offer in terms of giving messages of hope for people who are in a very dark place, whether it's emotionally or spiritually. What my book will tell you, how I got through it, and I hope that somewhere it might resonate with the person reading it, and they might think, well, you know what, I've learned something from this and I can apply it to myself, because I can't speak for other people's experiences, but I wrote this book with the hope that it would strengthen my child emotionally, spiritually, and I'm hoping that it will have the same effect on people, and I would like it to go to the four corners of the world, because everybody, there will be parts of this book that will resonate with somebody within their level of experience.
No, that's beautiful. Also, what comes across to me very strongly is your courage, tenacity, your resilience, and above everything else, your grace.
Oh, thank you.
I think by writing something like this, it's not just about you, it's about the bigger picture, isn't it? As difficult as it is in that journey, one comes out feeling hopefully a little bit, not just stronger, but have more clarity and have more balance.
Zindagi ek safar hai suana. Life is a journey. We make what we make out of it. That would be my music.
Bharti, you are truly amazing and a great inspiration. Thank you so much for making the time. Please do get your copy of Worth through the usual outlets. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.